I'd like to hand things off to Ariel Kennan in just a moment, Senior Director for the DBN, who will be moderating our first panel, the integral pillars for digital benefits delivery, access, security, and accuracy. For this conversation, Ariel will be joined by Naomi Lefkowitz, Manager, Cybersecurity and Privacy Applications Group at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Hanna Kim, who is the Director of Login.gov at the General Services Administration, and Patrick McLoughlin, Executive Director for MDThink, the state of Maryland's shared technology platform delivering human services to Maryland residents. Thank you so much to all of you for being here today. And with that, we'll move to our next panel.
There we go. Imagine the side button's working. Go figure. Oops. And now we went forward a bunch. We go to the light blue BenCon slide, please. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you on this a little bit of a dreary morning here in DC. So thanks for joining us and coming back for another day. I think we've been talking a lot about how emerging technology plays a role, but today we really want to talk about how all of these things come together. So how do we get to benefits that are accessible, that are secure, and are also accurate in their delivery? I think there's a lot of policies and procedures that help us set the guidelines around those things, but I think we're seeing where something might become out of balance based on a priority or a systems change or a policy that changes. And so really thinking about how can we design with those integrated pillars from the start. So I wanted to just do a little level setting on definitions. So in access, really making sure that the people who are eligible for benefits and services get the services that they're eligible for. There's been a huge push on access for many years. We're so lucky to also have quite a few advocates in the room who are really dedicating every day to that challenge as well. And I think you also heard from some of our government program administrators yesterday who this is their top priority, right? Like they feed families, they help people when they're out of work. Security, thinking both about data privacy. So in order to apply for these programs, families have to share a lot of information about themselves. It's very sensitive, and most of us would consider it maybe data we don't even want to share about ourselves with organizations. And so making sure we're protecting people's privacy and keeping that information safe. And then also, I think we've seen over the last couple of years that outdated technology is insecure, and it means that our systems are vulnerable to cyber attacks, identity fraud, some of the other issues that we're seeing. And I think we're also seeing responses sometimes that counter some of those issues that put some of the other parts of the pillars out of balance with each other. And finally, accuracy. I think there's an interesting thing going on across quite a few programs that actually, as we further digitized, we have error rates that are going up. So both our payments that might be overpayments or underpayments, as well as notifications that are inaccurate. Obviously not great for the people who are receiving those end services, but also really expensive for government who are having to duplicate actions to make those mistakes correct. So we hope today set some ideas about how we might be taking a more integrated approach. This conversation is really central to a lot of the work that we're driving at the Digital Benefits Network. So I am so grateful to have our wonderful government leaders join us in this conversation. And so I'm going to first start with a state perspective on access. And so we'd love, Patrick, how are you thinking about making benefits as accessible as possible in Maryland?
Great, thanks, and good morning, everybody. So in Maryland, we have a program called MDThink, and the goal of MDThink is really to try to consolidate and bring together information about the various programs that distribute benefits across the state. I think what is the case in many locations, we tend to wind up siloing these different programs, whether it's Medicaid, SNAP, TANF and cash, home energy assistance, emergency assistance, child support, adult services, you name it. And the reality is a lot of the information that is necessary for us to deliver those benefits or services tends to be duplicative. A lot of that information is also incredibly valuable for additional benefits to be received, and in many cases, it just relies on categorical eligibility to get you there. So what we've really been working on in the state is trying to find ways to break down those silos and look at things in from a more consolidated lens. And what we've done through the MDThink program is try to look at things from a more modern data architecture mindset. How do we begin to look at the data required in a way that allows us to collect that once rather than multiple times, and then start to align the way that we actually distribute those particular services or benefits. That involves multiple agencies. It's not a single agency that's responsible for delivering this. It winds up being much more of a collaborative approach. And the way that we've really started to try to continue to improve this, it's been an effort that's been ongoing for a number of years. It's not perfect, but we're continuing to work on ways to improve this, is really being more thoughtful in the type of information we collect and then how we share that data behind the scenes. And I'll give you an example. We often, when we go through determining someone's SNAP eligibility or Medicaid eligibility, ask them a ton of questions. How many of those questions are required? That often was a question that wasn't always asked. We asked more and more questions without actually looking at the policies and determining what's actually required. Once we collect that particular information, let's also look at the Venn diagram with multiple programs of what are the minimum requirements we need in order to deliver benefits. Let's ask those questions one time and then work behind the scenes to be able to distribute those benefits more appropriately. So that's really what our focus has been within the program. We've got a lot of different services that we do provide. As I mentioned, it's not just focused on Medicaid and SNAP and cash. Our program supports child support, collection and distribution, child welfare, adult services, provider care, things like that. But there's ways for us to connect all of those so that we can be more informative to our customers of the benefits that they're eligible for and not require them to continue to have to come back to the table to ask for more information. Something that's often said within the state by the Secretary of the Department of Human Services, Rafael Lopez, is we often require our customers to prove their poverty or to prove that they're eligible for these services, and we already have the data. We have everything we need in order to do that, and in many cases, we just continue to ask them over and over and over again. We need to culturally change that and make the benefits that they are eligible for and should be receiving accessible to them as quickly as we can.
Thank you. It's really inspiring, the vision that Governor Wes Moore is leading on child poverty in Maryland, but also to know that technology is core to that as a priority is really exciting. I want to turn to the big I in the room, which is that digital identity has more and more become part of benefits delivery, whether it's accounts or also increasing identity verification. And so, Hanna, I wanted to ask you, what possibilities can digital identity open for benefits access?
Thanks so much for that question, Ariel. And before I dive into that, I just first want to say thank you so much for the opportunity for the organizers of BenCon to share the stage with Patrick and Naomi. I was here yesterday throughout the day as well, and I felt walking away from the day just energized and so inspired. So thank you for giving us this forum to be able to revisit why we are doing the work that we are doing. So my name's Hanna, and I'm the director for Login.gov. And when I come to work every day, I feel this deep sense of responsibility and privilege because I think about the power and access you get when you're able to prove who you say you are. And having that identity is so critical to fully participating in society and touches on every single point of my daily day, like thinking about accessing money, but healthcare, but also employment, and just to name a few examples. And technology in the landscape of that question allows us to think about a future where there are even more possibilities and a potential to enable access. But when I think about identity in particular and all the challenging and frustrating experiences having to create an account over and over again and prove myself over and over again may create a friction that may not allow us to tap on the potential of this technology. So when I think about the work that we are doing here at Login, we share this commitment with many people in this room that we want to build a technology that is a human experience. We don't want to build a technology that's creating even more barriers for people who are accessing critical benefits. And that's central to our vision at Login.gov. We want to create a Public's one account for government, and similar to what Patrick said, where we don't have to ask the same question over and over again in the eligibility space, we don't want to ask people to prove who they are over and over again either. So we want to create a reusable, a secure, and a seamless credential system that people interacting with the government can reuse in every interaction with the government, either at the federal or state side. And I think this power of identity is even more important when it comes to instances in your life where you're facing an emergency and you're facing difficulty. And one example that I love sharing is last year, in the wake of the wildfires in Maui, Login.gov partnered with the Department of Labor and the state of Hawaii to be able to integrate Login to assist with the unemployment benefits program. And in addition to us being able to serve these populations that need very quickly, one of the things I really loved about that experience was the same person using Login.gov to access unemployment benefits could also use it in their interaction with FEMA, seeking for disaster assistance. And we don't want people who are at the darkest times of their experience to have to figure out single sign-on and figure out proving their identity over and over again. We want to make this as seamless and convenient as possible. And when I think about this story in the context of the question of like, why is digital identity so important? I think about how the story not only shares and shows the scale of how digital identity could enable better access, it also shows the individual stories and the individuals that we are impacting behind those numbers.
That's wonderful to include really the people that are behind these services is so important. Naomi, I wanted to turn to you about how do we ensure privacy while we're increasing access?
Yeah, it's a very critical question. Going all the way back to the Obama administration and the National Strategy for Trusted Identities in Cyberspace, and one of the four guiding principles was privacy, because we recognized that, as you said, not only are people having to provide information to proof, but as we get into these federated systems, what we really discovered. People often say, oh, there's a tension between security and privacy. We found less of a tension between those two things and more of a tension between privacy and interoperability. Because then, all of a sudden, some one entity with the identity can see where everybody is going and using that identity through an interoperable digital system. And so suddenly we have new tracking potential for people. So thinking about both, that's why we sometimes think of it as like a double-edged sword. It both helps to protect privacy, right? Like when you're protecting access to your data, your sensitive data, but it also can increase privacy risks as well. We've been focused on, I love to hear that, you're minimizing the data that you collect, right? That's like a core principle of privacy, right? But we can go even further than that with technologies like privacy enhancing cryptography and thinking about new ways of accessing data without actually having to transmit data or share data. So those are some areas that we've been working in at NIST.
Well, Pat, I think that's a great segue to you, back to Maryland, where you are sharing data. And so wanted, if you could share some specific examples of how Maryland is sharing data to improve accuracy, access and accuracy while protecting privacy.
Yeah, so what is interesting, as I mentioned, the services that are provided, the benefits that are distributed really come from a multi-agency endeavor. And we've got a number of agencies within the program and on the platform that require use of other agencies' data or authoritative data. We are in a fortunate space in that the way that the platform has been architected is that much of that data is actually contained within the platform itself. which allows for our ability to share that data between agencies without duplicating, sending, and really treat it more as a referential environment, does allow us to protect that in a slightly different way than some other organizations or states or the federal government may be set up. The key thing, though, goes back to what we are sharing, what is accessible. So one of the areas that we want to make sure is that when there is information that needs to be referenced or shared with other agencies, we just need to understand what is the minimum that needs to be shared, right? I think oftentimes we wind up looking at, I need access to X type of data, and then an entire data set gets distributed, rather than what is the pertinent information, or what's the querying that's required in order to deliver just the results you're looking for. And I think we have to really flip that mentality to think about, I just need the results, I don't necessarily need to have access to all the data. The other thing that I think is really important, and it gets to data sharing and data accuracy, is how are we managing the data behind the scenes to ensure that we're always pointing to the right authoritative data. In the case of the state of Maryland, we have a pretty significant master data management environment, so that allows us to identify what that true golden record is for that individual. It also allows us to look at what information we already have without having to request or pull in additional information since it's already available. So those are ways that we're really looking at trying to minimize what gets distributed or how it gets distributed. But the focus has been really on trying to provide that referential information. When we know we need to understand a particular cohort or a specific group or set of information, instead of saying, I need to understand where all of the under 18-year-old population is, let's get down to the specifics of what's required and provide that level of access.
That's great. And Hanna, I know Login has been also doing some creative ways to confirm data for agency partners while protecting people's privacy. Could you tell us about some of those?
Yeah, I would love to. So we spend a lot of time thinking about innovative ways to increase user convenience while not lowering our bar for security and privacy. And I think this is a core question that this community and the broader identity community thinks a lot about, because we don't want to allow the public to have to sacrifice their privacy and security just to access benefits seamlessly. So this is a question that we spend a lot of time on, and I wouldn't say this is an easy question, but we are making some headway in a lot of different ways. So I want to share a few examples. So on the authentication space, we've been really learning a lot from the experience and the reports of FIDO Alliance and the work that they're doing there on how to encourage more secure multi-factor authentication that's also user-friendly. So we rolled out Face Touch Unlock as part of an MFA option, and that's seen some really good results where users are not only finding it convenient, but it's a more secure MFA option. In the identity verification space, our approach has been slightly different, and we've been really leaning in on how do we leverage the existing touch points the public has with the government and make sure we're able to leverage that potential. And the reason why that relates to this question is when you're leveraging existing touch points, you have an opportunity to leverage existing security protocols, but also foster standardization of security standards across the different government channels. So we've seen a lot of success with that. One example of this is, you may have heard, but one of the exciting news we had earlier this year was we launched our in-person proofing service channel in partnership with USPS. So now 99% of the American population is within 10 miles of one of our USPS locations, where you have a choice to prove and verify your identity in person if you choose to. So we are able to have that amazing partnership, and then looking forward, we're collaborating with NIST and states, and of course I have to give a call out here. Maryland is one of our recent state partners, so we're really grateful for that. But we're collaborating with NIST and states to be able to leverage existing state driver's license infrastructure to test and innovate and experiment with new digital credentials like MDL. So we're really looking forward to continuing on that progress. But one thing I think is really important to point out in forums like this is this type of innovation of thinking about how to best balance security, privacy, and user convenience is not just about the technical capabilities that we're shipping out. And it's central to how we approach data privacy in general, but also our relationship with our vendors. So Naomi talked about some of the privacy enhancing technology, but we're using unique encryption methods to make sure we're protecting PII. And whenever we have interactions with our vendors, we put controls in place to make sure that there is data minimization, like Patrick talked about. Also, there is no commercialization of that data. And what this has enabled us to do is we are able to attract partner agencies and private sector partners who share that commitment of privacy with us. And the thing that I always love to say is that here at Login, we don't see privacy as a feature. It's a principle that's embedded in every single decision that we make. And we are really excited that we get to work on this with partners across the public and private sector that share that commitment with us.
I think a great point you've made here too is that you were thinking about not only options for people the public who are accessing services, but you're thinking about options for your agency partners, and that it's not one size fits all for all things. There has to be different levels coming up and down, which is a great way, I think, to segue over back to Naomi to share more about what some of the newer paradigms for thinking about privacy and security are that might apply in this space.
Well, I think we touched on some of it, but the idea that you can, it's great to hear that you're thinking about, sending back results, so you can say like, are you eligible for this benefit, rather than having to actually send the data that shows that you're eligible for the benefit. You can just get back a yes/no question, or still interested in the use of zero knowledge proof cryptography, which can really help limit that tracking when assertions are being sent, when they, sometimes assertions do need to be sent. So those are some of the areas that we continue to be interested in. But you can see a lot of that in our digital identity guidelines, special publication 863. The fourth version is out for public comment, so until October 7th. Got to give a plug for that.
Comment, right?
Yeah, but and I will say that it's privacy. We've been working since I started the privacy engineering program at NIST. Is integrating privacy guidance, into all of our publications, our security publications, and making sure that it's not just sort of a appendix or a section at the end, but that it's fully integrated. And I think that's why you see the results in federal programs, because privacy is an integral part along with security, because you have to think about, as you can see from the title, you have to think about all of these characteristics together. And that's not to say that, there aren't going to be trade-offs made, but you can only understand whether the right trade-offs for the moment in time and for the use case if you can consider all of the characteristics together.
Can you share a little bit more about some of the standards and guidelines that NIST produces that might be useful in this space?
Yeah, so our big one, as I just said, is our digital identity guidelines, and very excited. As I said, privacy has been in there all along, but what we have a new focus on is equity, and so. Again, the approach that NIST takes in this area is, one of like a risk-based approach, because it's impossible for NIST to say what should do in every situation, right? That use cases are different, and a risk-based approach really helps organizations sort of manage their particular contextual factors, and goes back to what I was saying about, how do you consider all of these characteristics together and decide like what the right set of, and sort of what the right mix is. And so there's a renewed emphasis on risk assessment. So both calling initially for organizations to do privacy risk assessments, but now also these equity impact assessments as well, and then pointing to more resources that the administration has put out about that can help think through some of the policies that you might have around equity to make sure that everybody has equal access to identities and benefits.
And I really encourage, especially our state partners in the room, please get in contact with our colleagues at NIST. Naomi's just one of our NIST friends who's here, but they're just really generous in sharing their knowledge and really willing to sit down with you to explore any of these ideas and their standards. So just a little plug for NIST as a service to our state friends. So Hanna, I want to turn back to you. How do you think verifications at different points in a service journey can work together?
Yeah, I love this question because I've been thinking deeply about like enabling an accurate outcome in service delivery really requires such deep coordination. And even as a Login.gov team, like we see ourselves as the front door of being able to identify people's identities so that we are able to prevent unauthorized access to different services. But even as we do the checks, and these checks are really important, we know that we aren't important, but a small part of the broader solution. So I think deeply about that question. And just to give you a little bit of background, as part of our identity verification service, Login.gov collects and validates different identity evidence like driver's license images as well as social security number. And while this helps mitigate identity theft and identity fraud, I think this group more than anyone would be aware this is like one type of fraud, right? There is a ton of different fraudulent access that could happen outside of identity, including eligibility fraud. And we recognize that with a sense of humility that our partner agencies who work alongside us may have even greater knowledge in the eligibility space, especially to detect and mitigate this fraud. So how we approach this partnership, I think, is like not a rocket science answer, but it requires that we really stay close to identifying what the exact challenges are and figure out coordination and also develop an action plan on how to address those challenges. And how we're doing that, I think is like not going to be a surprise to anyone in this group. Like some of it is happening in forums. Like we have working groups where we are working with subject matter expertise to figure out how we can better tackle and do information sharing as we think about service from an end-to-end perspective. But it's also about data sharing API in a way that's privacy centric. So I think all of that helps. And to the earlier point that I made, I think in order to enable a seamless service delivery and greater coordination, I do really go back to the theme of how do we leverage what is the existing touch points in government rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's critical for us enabling. We have, in order to enable an accurate outcome, it requires we think about service from an end-to-end perspective and identify what are the areas that we can foster information sharing and coordination to be able to lead to a better outcome for the public.
Great. So we have a question we're going to go down the line with to help us close. And we have plenty of time. We're doing great. You all have been so respectful and prompt as panelists. I really appreciate it. But let's start with Pat. What advice do you have for leaders spearheading change across all three pillars, access, security, and accuracy?
In thinking about this question, I think one of it is, or the thing I think is most important is really to challenge what's required. And the reason I think that's so important is, we mentioned earlier, I mean, Ariel started saying, we ask for a lot of really sensitive information, and we ask for it a lot. Do we need it? What is required to actually get the individuals we're serving the benefits and services that they need? And a lot of the work we're doing right now is actually a result of questions that leaders across the state started asking. Oftentimes we kind of assume that what is required is policy or in legislation or regulations because we're told that. But we have to investigate and understand what actually is required and start to trim out what is not. And that's made a significant difference for us. You know, in talking about those three pillars, the one other thing that I think is important to bring to those three is the customer experience. And what's really driven a lot of this change has actually been a result of us challenging the customer experience. We require individuals to answer 20, 30, 40, 50 questions and take hours of their time to fill out this information. How much of that's actually relevant in processing what we need in order to deliver that benefit? And that has turned into how do we start to reduce the number of questions we're asking? How do we ensure that we're only getting the data that's required for us to use? That's going to allow us to be a lot more effective in the way that we not only process and distribute the benefits that we need to, but also keep our customers' data as safe as possible and ensure they have trust in the fact that their data is being kept as safe as possible. So I think challenging or questioning what those assumed, the way it's always been policies are and what actually needs to be done in order to effectively get the services delivered.
Naomi, over to you.
Yeah, so I would, I think all of that is great and perfect, and I would add on to that, really engaging in meaningful risk assessments, both on privacy, on equity, that underpins, right, like what you actually need to know, and also recognizing that doing meaningful risk assessments really requires coordination across different parts of the organization or, among organizations, as you were pointing out, Hanna. So, understanding what your stakeholders need and doing a meaningful risk assessment.
I have a little precursor to my advice, which is like, change is so hard. And even change for the better and change for what is doing right is so hard. And I think I think it's important to start from that posture, recognizing like, yes, this is difficult work. And to lead through that change that is difficult, one of the things that I found the most helpful in my experience at Login is like putting transparency and communication at its center. And in particular, what we found really helpful in this space is we have actively created spaces and invited the public as well as our partner agencies in particular to let us know what we need to do better at and where we need to spend time on. And I think that's been such a game changer for how we approach our future direction as a program, because one, we are now having an opportunity to directly hear from the people who we are supposed to serve what we are doing well and what we need to do better at. But it's also enabling us to have these really tough trade-off conversations on, like, there is rarely a black and white answer in the context of digital identity and benefits access, and having a group of people that we can rely on to go through these really difficult trade-off questions has been really critical. And one of the outputs that, and of course I'm going to do a little plug as well, is that if you haven't seen the program roadmap for Login.gov, I would really encourage you to visit our website and look at what are the things that we're working on. And one of the things I'm really proud of that work is that it's sharing with you what we have done, what we have accomplished, and what we're working on next, and the problems that we're solving. But we're also very transparent about the challenges that we're facing and the barriers that are preventing us to be able to create even better outcomes that we desire to. So I really encourage you to check out that roadmap. And behind the scene, what's enabled a creation of an artifact like that has been mechanisms like our partner advisory group. So I was mentioning to Patrick and Naomi and Ario that one of the reasons why I'm in DC in addition to BenCon is we have our quarterly partner advisory group meeting that just happened last week. And this is a forum where we invite partner agencies across state and federal government to come and to be able to give us feedback on different tough questions and trade-offs and approaches, and we have really tough conversations in this room. But we walk away always more enlightened and energized, knowing that we are actually a small part in serving all these partner agencies who are really at the front line delivering these services. And we see our roles as not only enabling access for the public to be able to securely and seamlessly access their critical services, but how do we make sure we can concentrate on the digital identity issue so our partners can actually work on what they need to focus on? So I've found these forums to be extremely encouraging, and it's a good reminder that even as we strive for change that is hard, like, this is not a change that only one program and one entity is doing. And I think this is a great forum and a reminder that we're striving towards that change, and we need to rely on each other to foster the change that we want to see.
That's beautiful. I don't think I can think of a better note to end on about the work that we can all do together. So please give a big round of applause to this amazing panel.